Hi, welcome to Thomas Roof After Image Walk 1989-2020 online forum. My name is Iris Shuping Huang, the Chief Curator of Exhibition Department of National Taiwan Museum of Fine Art. Thomas Roof After Image Walk 1989-2020 is organized by National Taiwan Museum of Fine Art. And we are pleased to work closely with artist Thomas Roof and the curator Martin German on this fantastic show in Taiwan. It's more significantly, we realize this exhibition under the current COVID-19 challenge, as the world is now separated by the threat of the coronavirus and many travel restrictions among the borders. Following up this change, due to the coronavirus, the world seems rebuilding an invisible wall between human beings and the wall between the democracy alliance and the opposite. The threat seems more invisible, and the boundary appear to be clear. It makes us more interesting to explore that what is invisible behind the visible wall, and to see Thomas Roof's photography and image after image. When the curator Martin and I were preparing this show since late 2019, while the COVID-19 cases was first revealed to the world, we did not realize then that we will witness the historical change of the world. And after that, we both more sure about this exhibition well and must be taking place at Taiwan. Standing at this turning point of a historical moment to present Thomas Roof's work and his most recent work, Tapu Chinois, with its premiere show in Asia. Not only this new work is highlighted in the exhibition, After Image provides a critical debate on mutable reality of photography. The exhibition chose to start with Roof's camera's photography practice and to focus on the artist's consistent investigation of image-making process that constitute the world. It can be read as a comprehensive moment, a comprehensive comment on the global history of photography and its different culture and technical phenomena. Without saying, Thomas Roof represents a key figure in the transformation of pictorial structures of photography over the past 40 years. The artist never stopped challenging the definition of photography in relation to the technical and political history. That makes his art widely recognized as the most revolutionary development in contemporary photography. This exhibition takes us to travel the art journey of Thomas Roof from 1989 to 2020, from the fall of Berlin Wall, the invention of the World Wide Web, to now, the start of a new war triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the temporary closure of many art institutions and travel restrictions posed by many nations, it forced us to rethink what is art now and how can we make a reconnection to people and to the world internationally. This forum and artist talk is supposed to be physically happened in Taiwan, with artists and curators present. We all expecting to meet each other face to face, but the COVID-19 surge make this impossible. However, I would like to quote a very important sentence by Martin when we were discussing the travel plan and exhibition. He said, even if we all travel less in the future, we should not give up internationality as a concept. Carrying on this concept, let's begin with today's online forum. First of all, I would like to introduce the speakers with us today. The artist Thomas Roof, As many of you might be here because of Thomas, photographer working today. And we are honored to invite him today to give artist talk about his photographic art practice. Thomas will be our first speaker. Then following up, the second speaker is Martin German, the exhibition curator of After Image. Martin is a very active independent curator now based in Germany and was working worldwide. In the realization of this exhibition, he is a very important and inspiring curatorial partner for me. In this second part of forum, we will hear from after an hour talk by the artist and curator. We will have a 30 minutes discussion with two panelists to join us. Mr. Chao Liangbin, would you say hi? And Mr.
Sure. Hi. Thank you very much.
Chen. Two of them are both artists and researchers on photography and image. Chao Liangbin is also founder of a Lightbox photo library. And I'm pleased to have no discussion. This online forum is supported by Good Institute Taipei, and I would like to take this chance to thank Director Teresa Hammer for her great support. Now I will hand over to Thomas to start his talk. Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Iris. Thank you very much for this introduction. So maybe I should go back 44 years. Yes, that was in 1977 when I started studying at the Art Academy in Düsseldorf. And the teacher there was Bernd Becher. You probably know his work and the work of his wife. So they are together. They are called Bernd and Tilla Becher, and they were pretty famous for their very objective, black and white, straightforward photography of industrial buildings, normal buildings, of the industrialization in the 19th century. And at that time, yes, I really believed that photography captures reality. So before that, I was working with 35mm camera, but from 1977 on, I mainly used a 4x5" negative camera to really get the sharp, very objective, and in Germany you call it sachlich, this kind of very sharp images. And so I was practicing this for more or less 10 years. So I was shooting the very first series were the interiors. It's a series about the living rooms of my parents, my aunts, uncles, and the parents of my friend. And it was really objective. So I did not arrange anything in the room. I shoot it as it was, and I did not use artificial light. I just used the light that came through the windows. Then going on, I got interest in the portrait because at that time, around 1980, you had, you could say internationally, you had concept and minimalistic art. And in Germany, especially in Germany, you had a kind of new wave of expressionist paintings. And I had the feeling that the portrait had disappeared in contemporary art. So I wanted to try that. And when I started with the portraits, I really wanted to bring the portrait back to 0.0, to reduce everything that was not necessary. And I ended up more or less in a kind of a passport photograph. When I then made my first exhibitions with these portraits, the portraits were printed in a small size, like 18 by 24 centimeter. I had to realize that the visitors in the exhibition, they had some problems because I had my first exhibition with a portrait in Düsseldorf, and the person on the photographs, they were all my friends and colleagues from the art academy. So yeah, there was a row of portraits on the wall, and somebody joined me and said, and pointed to one of the portraits and said, "Oh, Thomas, that's Pia." And I said, "No, actually, Pia is standing over there. You're looking at the photograph of Pia." So I realized that people mixed photography with reality. So they just did not get it, that there's a medium in between. And maybe this was one of the reasons that I then started printing them in a very big size. They were then, the first presentation was with the portraits, and they were about 180 by 220, so it was a really large format. Technically interesting that was the time where Kodak or the film producers really developed films that had true colors. If you go back to the 1960s, you always had problems with the colors on the film. They were just not balanced in a proper way. And also because in the 1980s, there was need for big advertisement. These companies also made paper pretty big. So I took advantage of these new technology developments and printed these portraits in a big size. And suddenly, at the opening, somebody was standing next to me and he said to me, "Wow, that's a big photograph of Pia." So then finally they got it. So this is a small episode from, at that time everybody was shooting analog. There did not yet exist a personal computer. There did not exist digital cameras. We still lived in an analog world. But already when I did the portraits, I had to realize, oh, the truth. Photography is capturing reality is true. So the camera is capturing the reality that is in front of it. But this reality can be staged, like with my portraits. I was the person who picked the person to do the portrait. I sometimes said, "Oh, this is a nice shirt, could you wear it?" I told them when they sit in front of the camera, "Can you go up, down, left, right?" So I was the person who had the control over the photograph. And so that, then led to my, kind of skepticism to, photography captures reality. Nevertheless, I continued practicing with the portraits, the interiors, and I also was shooting houses or buildings in Düsseldorf, my architecture series. And finally, I had the idea, I want to make the most objective photograph that is possible. And that's shooting the stars. Because I have no chance to arrange anything, manipulate anything up there because it's just so far remote. thinking about this project, I had to realize that, oh, even though I'm professionally educated and I'm professionally equipped, I'm not able to take these photographs. I need help from some even more professionals, from astronomers. And so I was looking for an observatory, and I found it with the ESO, which is the European Southern Observatory. And I was able to, okay, I could not choose with their large telescope, they didn't allow me, but at least I could use their negatives, which were pretty big. They had a size of 30 by 30 centimeters. And Kodak developed a film, a black and white film, especially for the needs of this kind of astronomic photography. And the quality of these negatives were really, incredible. They were really state of the art, the latest technology. So when I then thought of doing the printings, I was confronted with another problem. So far, the last 10, 13 years that I've been practicing photography, I was the person who pulled the trigger. And now I was no more the author of these images, these photographs. So that was a big problem for me, because to give up authorship, to be not the person who pulls the trigger was at that time, you can call it an intellectual problem. But I had to decide, either if I don't give up authorship, I cannot do this work. So I have no chance. So I gave it up, but actually at that time, there was also already a younger generation of artists from New York, like Richard Prince, Cheryl Bean, Cindy Sherman, some more who made appropriated work. So they were working not in a similar way, but they were also using images and works from somebody else. And maybe giving up authorship with the stars also made it easier for me to continue working with archives later on, like with the newspaper photographs, which was the series after the stars. But at that time, so I did the stars from 1989 up to 1992. I also thought that art photography is nice and beautiful, but there's other photography in the world that is at least as interesting as art photography, like scientific photography, like with the stars, or journalistic works, or medical photographs. And because these, the stars, they are, I call it prosthetic photography, because we are using the telescope as a kind of prosthesis, like my lenses. Without my lenses, I could not see sharp. And the telescope can deliver images that we cannot see with naked eye. So it's a kind of prosthesis. And then already in 1991, during the Second Gulf War, I saw these green images on the TV. And I was really fascinated by this technique, by this kind of starlight system. And so I thought, I would also like to work with this technique. And yes, I then could rent one of these kind of starlight system that I could attach to my camera, and I started shooting in Düsseldorf. And yeah, so that's how the night photographs came to life, even though they look a bit dead. Yes, and so up to the year 2000, I was working. It was a mix of analog, prosthetic instruments or techniques, and also since the mid-90s, Photoshop showed up. So the famous software. And a lot of my colleagues said, oh no, you cannot shoot digital, or you should not use Photoshop because that is all fake and all wrong what they do. So far, the cameras were still did not have or reach the quality of a 4x5-inch negative. But what I then did was I scanned my negatives and continued working on the screen. So, because I thought this kind of digital, how do you say, working with Photoshop was just a new tool. It was just a new lens that I could use to either alter image, to correct images, and so on. And I worked the first time with Photoshop to do some collage. They are called Plakate. Unfortunately, they are not in the exhibition. You could probably find them somewhere in the internet. But that was, my first experience with Photoshop, because I realized that I'm not as skilled as John Hartfield or other Russian photocollagists to cut and then glue and reproduce them. So I wanted to do that with Photoshop. And at that time, so I had interiors, portraits. I've been working on 7 or 8 different series that I thought they are not connected at all with each other. That was, it really looks as if these works are from, 8 different artists. So I thought, okay, so yes, that I'm a bit schizophrenic. But when I then went on working, on the nudes, on, the distribution of the images, the photographs on the internet, or when I was working on a substrate, which represent for me, the constant noise of the internet, or yes, then I got interest in the structure of the digital photography, which is the pixel. I also did not realize that the internet would have consequences on the structure of photographs. But in my JPEG series, I show pretty nice that new ways of distribution for images create new techniques, and they change the structure of the image. And yes, now I could name all the other series, like yeah, the photograms, the machines. Maybe I should talk a little bit about historical photographs. I came to the negatives when I was working on my photograms. So the photograms were abstract. Actually, in the analog world, they are camera-less photography, but I even brought them to a point that they are virtual photographs now. And when I was working on these photograms, from time to time, I had to invert my screen to check composition of the photograms. And I had a lot of photographs on my desktop, and so they also inverted and became a negative. And I thought this is an interesting aspect. And so I asked my daughters, do you know what a negative is? And they would say, no. They probably have that digital camera and in the meantime, only using the mobile phone to shoot photographs. And they've never seen a negative. And so I thought, oh, maybe it's time to work on negatives, to look at negatives. So that then created the negative series. And actually on my desktop, at that time I had a lot of 19th century photographs. And they were of albumen print, and they turned in a kind of a cyanotopy. And when I then was asked by the Victorian Orbit Museum to do a project with them, I picked photographs from Linnaeus' tribe, and I knew that he was shooting with paper negatives. And I thought, this is really strange. So I had experience with the analog film, which is gelatine. I had experience with the glass plate, but shooting with a sensitized paper sounded pretty strange for me. But yeah, maybe you could say that the English photography in the 19th century is, paper negatives. The French, German photography is glass plates and daguerreotypie. So there were just two different ways of capturing the image. And these paper negatives, they were stored for 160 years, and of course, sometimes they were not properly stored. And so they had damages and losses in the negative, but I liked that. And I wanted to make some, new prints with these 160 years old negatives. And then also bring them to the size that if you go close, you can see the structure of the paper. Because the smallest part of these photographs is not the pixel or the photographic cone, but it's the paper, the structure of the paper itself. So I thought that's really nice to look at that. So you can see that it's a kind of, my work is a kind of ongoing investigation in all the different fields and times of photography. And maybe I should read I have a list of all the different photographic techniques, and I just read some of them. So you have aero photography, you have astrophotography, you have candid photography, you have chromophotography, you have cinematography, you have cystophotography, you have heliophotography, infrared photography, macro photography, microphotography, photophotography, skiography, spectroheliography, spectrophotography, and the latest thing is the panoptic photography. So you see, there's still a lot of work to do. I hope this wasn't too fast. Or do you miss something?
Hello. So, Ruth, did you finish your artist talk? You would like to add some more information, or we can go back to you with the question later?
I would say, yeah, let's go back to with questions. So,
Okay.
I could still talk about the information industry, and
Okay.
of course, I could talk about the tableau chinoise, but maybe we should do this all together.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, agree. Okay. Okay, so so now we will stop here for the Thomas artist talk, and then we will come back later. Then we have a second speakers, Martin German. We'll start a second part of the presentation. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so let's welcome Martin.
Yeah, thank you very much. So for the invitation, also from the museum, but also from Thomas to work with me on an exhibition once more. And what I would like to do now is actually to give you a short introduction in how I could, together with the artist and Iris, how we translated what Thomas just told us into the format of an exhibition. Because on the one side, you always have the artist's work in the studio, and I think it's beautiful that he told us from his studio perspective how he works. But in the exhibition, the work always changes because it also becomes public and it becomes subject of an interpretation. And what we actually tried with this show here was to embed a time frame, and that's namely the time frame from 1989 to 2020. And I think it is a very particular time frame because, as Iris told before, in 1989, Thomas actually started the first time with works he didn't shoot himself, but he edited himself. So not a new, but we knew it from the pictures generation appropriation, but within his practice, a new way to produce art came in. And historically, of course, this moment, which lies more or less 30 years back, coincides with the situation at the Tiananmen Square in Beijing, which indicates a certain political development within China. But even more important, the year 1988, the internet was drafted. And I think the internet changed our lives and also our understanding of images dramatically. And also Thomas' work from this moment on went more and more back to explore the infrastructures of photography, because from that moment also more and more private persons were doing images. They were circulating faster and faster in the internet. And I think it's interesting that the artistic work then goes to the technologies, to the infrastructure, to the channels which make images distribute. And so this was more or less the conceptual framework of the show, to also very important to embed Thomas' famous portrait series, but as after images, because the exhibition title After Images is kind of selected from two sides. From one side is the historical side. We are living in an age after images, so to speak. So there are so many images. How do we deal with that? On the other hand, the after images is just a physiological phenomenon. It's on, if you look in the sun and close your eyes, you have an after image. And I think Thomas' work goes from the cultural meaning of pictures to the physiological, prosthetic, as he called it, work of images. So I think this title captures quite beautiful the spectrum of his work in setting a time frame. And now we will have a quick walk through the exhibition, which we could do in Taiwan. So let me does this work?
Yes, we see the screen.
Okay. Yeah, the exhibition starts actually with the most recent series Thomas was doing, and which is called Tableau Chinois. And as we learned in his talk, the photographic history is for him like a quarry. It's like a wide field where he's going through genre to genre. And this time he was interested actually in the propaganda image. And he found for Tableau Chinois, he found the propaganda images of the People's Republic from China. And he found them in a magazine which was made for foreign relations. It's a French magazine called La Chine he used, but there were also coffee table books of the great leader. And I think for the artist, those images were extreme in their beauty, but also in their rhetoric to convince people of an idealized world. There are various reasons why we wanted to start the show with this. The first reason is, of course, it's the most recent work of the artist, and I think it's always beautiful to show what he's doing right now. The second reason is that this series in itself shows the growth of genres Thomas is working in. You see this portrait of Mao. It's actually a reminder to the portrait series he did himself. And then you also see landscapes, you see sports, you see actually all fields which were used in propaganda photography, or of life, which is covered by propaganda photography. But the third reason is, of course, that it combines the analog age and the digital age. And this we can see in the process he's applying, because in the large photographies in the museum gallery, we can see both the printing pattern and the digital pixel, which is kind of through a layering process Thomas applies, integrated in these Tableau Chinois. The title, by the way, Tableau Chinois, comes from a work of Icelandic artist Ero, an artist book from 1972, or 74. Also, Thomas appropriated this title from someone else, and actually he scans those images, those propaganda images, and then he layers those scanned images, where you can see also the printing grid, with 2 or 3 pixel layers, and then from there he's erasing within the pixel layers that you can see the original image again. So he's like an archaeologist, and actually to work with images today has something to do with archaeology in a way. Also, there were people saying Thomas is an archaeologist of photography's history. And why, of course, the question is, and maybe we can discuss it later on, why to do this with these Chinese propaganda images. First of all, we shouldn't forget that Mao was in the early 70s the most famous person on earth, according to the Life magazine. So his image circulated everywhere, and it was a pop icon even. So and this makes it, of course, interesting today. Another question which comes up theoretically to the series is how the Communist Party turned from a state communist system to a state capitalist system, which is very, very interesting. And last but not least, most of us are using iPhones. And these iPhones are produced in China. And the question this series raises is, which state is bigger? Is it Apple or is it China? And this is, I think, a very important question. So this series makes use of very strong images, but not to kind of judge on anything, but rather to pop up questions, but pop up questions with the use of this strange beauty of those idealized photographies. And from here, we go to the second chapter of the exhibition, which is devoted to historical milestones of photography. And here, this theme from the analog and the digital age, if we could say so, is more embraced. It's more embraced into the negative and the JPEG as counterparts. As Thomas told before, he was from 2013 on working with old negatives. He found negatives, by the way, both of artists' studios, but also negatives which were produced during the process of colonization. And I think this is a very important subject in the recent work of Thomas, the way how images were used during the process of colonization, because they produced the image of the so-called other in the West. And I think that the so-called other didn't really ask about the way it was portrayed. So the people in India and in Burma, where these negatives come from, they had to portray, they had to pose, and they had to pose towards the machine, towards the technological, but also the cultural rules of the machine. And this is a very important part of those works, that they question in how far something like dignity disappears within the process of fixing something as a picture and selling it as reality. The same is with the series Tribe, which we see on the left side, which was produced by Thomas in collaboration with the Victoria and Albert Museum, who are harboring this amazing archive of Captain Linneo's Tribe. And these landscape photographies of these pagodes, they are actually, they show two things. On the one hand, he really altered the images and idealized those, that they would become closer to his taste. And also, because they are originally from the 1850s, at that time, thinking photography and painting was very kind of, it was very in a proximity. So photography was seen as a concurrent to painting, and the rhetorics, the cultural rhetorics of painting were in the minds. And also Captain Linneo's Tribe, with the clouds he added and these little alterations, tried to make those works look painterly. So here we deal with the negative, two types of negatives. And then there are two other milestones in photography's history, technological history, I would say. On the one hand, there's the JPEG, which clearly represents it's a form to it's a form to make images smaller, the JPEG, as Thomas told before, and we can see the pixel. The closer we come, the image disappears. And we have a variety of images in the exhibition of pictures in Taiwan. It shows not this one here. I put this one in from the 9/11 catastrophe to also show how Thomas is using events to make various images of those. Yeah, we also see landscape. We also see other image types like natural catastrophes, just those images circulating on the internet at that time. The interesting thing about those is also that they are very light as files, but if they are on the wall, they are very heavy. They are even like photographic objects, one could say. This is another term which is often used in discussing Thomas' work. And last but not least, of course, we could also here think again of painting, of the pointillism in France, which we could also draw an analogy to. So there's always constantly in Thomas' work the analogy to painting, which of course has to do also with the format, because Thomas was one of the artists who blew up photography to the tableau format, and I think it was Thomas and Jeff Wall who started with that first. However, the other series, which is also a historical milestone, is of course the photogram, and this is an absolutely fascinating series by Thomas, because in 2012 he started in remaking photograms, but in a completely virtual darkroom, or in a completely virtual digitalized surrounding. And I find that quite fascinating because of the simple reason that in the 1920s, so more or less 100 years ago, the photogram represents actually the moment that photography became art, that it became some kind of fine art, because it is a photography which is independent from the technical apparatus. It just worked with light and with emulsions and with chance. And artists like Moholy-Nagy or Man Ray made use of the photogram with these spirals or with lenses, all things Thomas recreated in the digital darkroom. And I find, and whereas the photograms in the 20s represented a certain amount of new freedom for photography, when Thomas is remaking them in a completely digital surrounding, a surrounding like we live in today, mainly, or half of our days, I find that quite an interesting, stunning comment on the state of our world and the state of freedom and of connectiveness. So this is the second chapter of the show. And the third chapter is devoted to astronomy. And I think before Thomas Wolff wanted to become an artist, he actually also thought about becoming an astronaut, of traveling through space and of exploring the what's beyond our horizon. However, in the end, he became an artist, but the astronomy as a personal passion and also as a very image-strong field of research still provides space for his works. And as we had it before in his talk, the first series he didn't shoot himself, but more made himself, were these stars. And I think you all know from the museum in Taiwan the incredible depth those works have. And I think one of the really interesting things is, of course, to think about what we see on those images. And what we see on those pictures is mainly light of stars which are not alive anymore. And I think in that sense, those works are also a ground zero of photography and of the truth value of photography. Because, yeah, most of these stars will probably have already been died at the moment when their light or appears at the photographic plate. So yeah, those works have an incredible depth, and we combined them with two other series which also deal with astronomy in the broadest sense. The first one is, I think, started in 2007, as far as I'm right. Thomas, is it correct?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and those were made with a they prepared in a way the series, the later series. They work with scientific material you can download from the NASA. Everyone can download, so it's also about databases and archives the work constantly. And it's made by a sonde. I don't know what's the name in English. It's by an orbiter.
Probe.
Sorry?
It's a probe.
Okay,
probe.
Which is called Cassini.
Yes.
Yes. And the shots you can download, the Cassini is going around the Saturn. And the shots which were made with those came in 1000 by 1000 pixel in a very kind of low resolution, and Thomas later recolored them and blew them a little bit up, so that they have also a strange beauty, and they again play with the ideas of minimalism, but of painting. And if you go closer in the museum, you will see it. Then also small pixels appear, which refer to the original resolution of these pictures. And then, on the other hand, to contrast those, and also to contrast the stars as such, we put in works from the Mars series. The series Thomas also made with pictures one can download from the public image database of the NASA, and those again show incredible high resolution images of the Mars. And what Thomas did was actually to color them and to put a light angle into it, so that also the question of surface and depth is thematized here, which is always important in photography, but also that you feel a little bit like someone approaching a landscape from a spaceship. And last but not least, of course, the question, is there color in space? I mean, I think that's also very important. And those pictures are really extremely high resoluted and really tempting to look at. So this is the third chapter which we made to kind of make the work compact. And the fourth is a bit freestyle in a way. It's called genre, and it's from that aspect freestyle because Thomas' work is actually going through all genres we can imagine, from architecture to whatsoever. We started this chapter with the most evident and most important genre, which is, of course, the portrait, the human portrait. What happens if the human portrait is kind of fixed in photography? But we didn't use the portraits Thomas became in a way famous with, which are the large portraits from the 80s. But instead, we used the other portraits which were made with a criminological machine. I think they were presented first at the Venice Biennial and Thomas in Venice, and here Thomas is layering various works from his own output to produce, what is called here phantom imagery, or works which look like phantom images which are produced by the police if they search for murders. And I think it's interesting also, again, to see the actuality of the work. Suddenly we have these discourses around gender fluidity and of identity as such. And I think it's so interesting that those works suddenly gain an importance for those discourses as well. But on the other hand, it's just a simple further technology, photographic technology Thomas went through. And then we have here two series also from the 2000s, the substrates and the cycles. And the substrates were made by layering, and that's also that's a good combination with the other portraits, because in both series it's about layering, stapling pictures on top of each other, so to speak, or files. And for those substrates, Thomas layered Japanese manga images on top of each other until these hallucinatory works emerged, or these files emerged, which make us think of hippie aesthetics in the 60s or 70s. But actually, on the other hand, they are also a comment at that time on this enormous mass of images surrounding us daily, and in that sense, they provide a certain strangely beautiful ground zero of images as such. What I find remarkable about them as well is that they were made with Japanese manga, and I find it remarkable because of that reason, and you in Taiwan might know it. well, that the manga in Japan is, of course, a way to deal with topics you actually cannot speak of. And I find it quite interesting that Thomas is using exactly those works for this series. The cycles, on the other hand, they refer to mathematics and to magnetism. And it's, of course, very far away from photography in a very usual sense. On the other hand, not, because photography has to do with the apparatus, with the machine, with calculation. And so also those works, which, by the way, led him to the photograms. So they were also not a pre-runner, but they were one step in making the photograms possible. So also those works we can understand in the concept of a far expanded photography. And of course, these two series in the very end once more relate to painting, and also technically, because the cycles, they are printed on canvas. Yeah. And last but not least, we have the nudes here. Thomas told about it, I think, in 1999 when he started with that series. Suddenly also the pornographic activities or kind of, let's say, business in the internet started to grow up, and Thomas made this series also as a comment on that. And as we can see here, there's also art historical references. We might think of the nude descending the stairs of Duchamp, but also of Gerhard Richter, of whom in general we could think about this series, because this the effect is a little bit the same, but it's of course made with completely different means and with a completely different technique than Richter made his haze fog effects. And I think one funny aspect of that series is that at some point Thomas said that he has a democratic intention to picture all possible ways of sexual activities on the world, and I think this is a very, very good motive to make that series. And the last and final chapter of our exhibition is press. And there's a German philosopher, Niklas Luhmann, who once said, "Everything we know from mass media." And I think over the last 30 years, and of course before already as well, but this simple saying really expanded dramatically, that all we know from mass media. And the series shows the night, a very fantastic, beautiful series Thomas spoke about when he was declaring war to Düsseldorf, in a way, with his night vision in front of the camera, also as a comment on the Gulf War, which was on at the moment, because we know everyone here in Germany, and I guess in Taiwan as well, got on his TV screen those strangely eerie images from the American attacks, aestheticizing war in a certain way, and also covering whose interests are at stake. And by declaring war to his hometown, to Düsseldorf, Thomas asks indirectly, not directly, that's my interpretation, about what was it? Was it the oil, and was it maybe the Western or even the US-American interest in oil? But those are things which are not directly communicated in the series. We could also easily connect this series to Eugène Atget, I think it's outspoken, and this emptiness and eeriness, if there are no humans anymore in a picture. Those parts are also there are also analogies to those works, as well as to the discourses around war and military technology. On the right hand, we see a work which beautifully connects to the beginning of the exhibition, of course, to Tableau Chinois, because here we can identify the printing pattern, the printing grid very well, and we can the printing grid shows us nothing less than the person who's not President of the United States anymore, Donald Trump, who was already in the 80s when Thomas started to collect images from newspapers, a media star. And actually, the newspaper image work is also about archives, of course, but it's also about what happens if you take a picture out of its context, because the works, I think they are double size of the original image or fourth size, Thomas?
Double the size, so it's 4 times the size of the original photograph.
Yeah, exactly. But then so it's doubled, so that the technology, the pattern comes to the foreground, but the credit line or the is disappeared. So you don't know what to do anymore with the picture. And as you know from the museum, there are so many different pictures from newspapers around the world covering actually what was arriving in the newspaper in Düsseldorf, from Mao to the Shah in Iran, to various themes from art history. So also that work is actually, again, a meta work and shows the way how many series are constructed in just covering what's there, what's beforehand. And I think we mirrored to also finish the exhibition that historical series beautifully with a series Thomas did recently, or I think he started in 2015, I guess, I remember. And that's about photographies, news photographies from the space age, from the 50s to the 70s in the US. So from that time, Donald Trump tried to reanimate, basically, where the American dream was, of course, still big, and where it was about progress, about future, but also about film stars, and when the Hollywood industry was really was booming. And these works are made with a very simple technique. So Thomas collects and buys old press photographies, and then he scans them, and on the back side there are editorial notes, and they are just printed on the front side. So you suddenly have one image which shows both the picture but also the editorial decisions behind it, and so it's quite interesting and quite quite stunning to see those two together. And I think it's also a nice way to end the exhibition with propaganda in a way how it started. Yeah, I think this is it for now. I could say more about, but I think that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Martin, for giving a very profound curatorial explanation on the show. And also thank you for Thomas for a very clear talk about the idea from the very beginning of his practice till now. So now it's the time for the panel discussion. So let's involve all the panelists in the discussion. Hi, Mengjian, and hi, Liang.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I think many of us, as myself, are very curious and interested in knowing more about Thomas' most recent work, Tableau Chinois. So my first question and our first discussion is regarding the Tableau Chinois. So Thomas, what drive you to start working with the Tableau Chinois? And did you collect in all those Chinese propaganda image yourself? And since when? And what is the idea push you to start with this new work?
Okay, so yes, I have a pretty nice collection of books, magazines, and posters, postcards, etc. about propaganda images. I would say propaganda is nothing else than advertisement. So in the communist states, you have propaganda, or not only in the communist states, in the how do you say, dictatorial states, you have propaganda, because it's hard stuff that people have to consume. And in the Western world, it's advertisement. So actually, I would say the Western world is about consuming, and the advertisement industry is very strong. And if you take a communist country like China, main China, even though you could not call it anymore communist, I would call it post-communist or one party power. It's a visual language, and it's different. So at the very beginning of the Russian Revolution, you also had very powerful images, very powerful propaganda, which was really, how do you say, I would call it avant-garde imagery. And so that was in the 1930s and 40s. I would say the Chinese propaganda starts, the Chinese propaganda with photographs starts in the 1950s, when the Communist Party was more or less established within the country. So Chiang Kai-shek had gone to Taiwan, and the Communist Party with their leader Mao Zedong, they were established in mainland China, and they wanted to bring their ideas to the whole world. So what they did, they used idealized photographs of the friendly leader Mao Zedong. They made photographs of happy people in happy landscapes, in happy happy soldiers in happy tanks, things like that. So when, for our Western eyes, they are completely kitsch. It's really incredible how kitschy these photographs are. And those images, they were printed in books and magazines to multiply their, the presence of this Communist Party and the leader to the Western eyes. And it's a really strange kind of visual language of propaganda. And at a certain point, I just wanted to, how do you say, to analyze a little bit this kind of structure. So what I did with these photographs, or with the magazines, the photographs in the magazines, I scanned those images from books or from the magazines with the pattern grid of the offset print, so that you can see that it comes from the information, so-called information industry. And then I added 2 layers of digital pixels to bring them to the 21st century. And what I wanted to try is to make a kind of it's a collision of these 2 techniques. So the old offset printing thing and the digitalized image of 2020 or 2021. And the command or the idea was, of course, that now these images are, I would call them schizophrenic. because you can see in the meantime, I would say, technologically, China is on the level of the Western tech industry, but ideologically, they're still living 50 years back. So I think China, mainland China, is just a schizophrenic space. And unfortunately, every new technology, the government or the party takes advantage of it to have more control on their people, which is really perverse. Okay, in Western countries, you have the tech companies who try similar things with, stealing all the information from their buyers and from their users. So it seems that it's either power or money who drives these people to do these things to their people.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, for the idea about how you start with the Tapu Xunhua. And I think now I would like to hear Liang or Mengjian would like to have a response to this new work of Thomas. Maybe you can share some of your thoughts and share to the audience. Maybe we start first with Liang.
Lady, how about lady first?
Okay, Mengjian.
All right, ladies first. Thank you. Well, thank you, Thomas and Martin, for the very interesting and exciting introduction of your work and the show. And yeah, I've heard that you wanted to hear from us about the new Tapu Xunhua work. And I do find it really interesting, especially seeing it in person. And because we've heard so much about your meticulously produced images, and finally seeing them in person, it is quite striking. But from this new body of work, we can really see obvious traces of your career, like the themes that you're interested in, the techniques that you applied to in your investigation of photography. But what makes me wonder is that this new work, it seems, it's like larger in scale and softer in tone, and the pixels, while in your previous works, they are like exposed. They are intentionally revealed and exposed, and they seem a little bit brutal and rough. But in this work, it's like refined. They're very subtle, and they almost, I feel like they are naturalized in your whole process and technique, and they work almost like brush strokes in paintings. So it's quite interesting, because I feel like there is a slight shift from the pixels being an artifact of the image to like an artifice that you apply, kind of. It's quite interesting. It's more subtle. But what interests me even more is the subject matter, as Iris just previously mentioned, about your motivation, and you gave us a quite interesting, quite informative background of this series. But I've noticed, because I've noticed from your career that you have always followed the advancements of the photographic technologies, and then your work is like a constant response to all these techniques, mechanisms that construct the image world that we live in. But for all these works throughout the 40 years, we rarely see something that is very obviously social, that obviously has like a social political critique in them. There are like commentaries and critiques on culture, on the society in general, or how the image culture, but it's almost like it never outweighs your investigation on the medium itself. So in this series, the subject matter is very, very specific. And then you can see a little bit of, when you call it a beautiful schizophrenia, there is some kind of like a critique coming in. And then obviously China is now the superpower, one of the superpowers in the world, and they kind of operate their power in a very subtle way, not so much like the superpowers in the Cold War. So I'm just wondering if there is a turn in your working method, in your investigation of the media, whether if this social and political critique element or this commentary will become more and more in your work, as we see in Tableau Chinois. Yeah, so.
Okay, so maybe, yes, you're right. So actually, I'm an artist, and I'm a human person, and I have an opinion about politics, about different issues. But if it comes to public, I don't want to tell people that my opinion is the only one and the right one. So what I prefer to do is to make a suggestion, to put it on the platform, to, yes, of course, I have very special opinion on my Tableau Chinois, but I don't want to make it too strict. I want to, leave it open for everybody. And of course, I guess the Taiwanese audience must have valid concerns about this series, because it's exactly the opposite of life they practiced the last 40 years. You live in a democratic country, and these images are just present the opposite of the life you lead. But nevertheless, it's actually, the Tableau Chinois are not only made for Taiwanese audience, but for international audience. And so the reception in every country will be different. And I think it would be too little to just fix it on one critical issue. Thomas Ruff says the Communist Party is an asshole. Let's say that. Of course I could do that, but it would not help the discussion. It would be my opinion. And in terms of technology, so you can, because I've been practicing such a lot of different techniques, using archives, using digital tools, using analog tools, the Tableau Chinois is a kind of a mix of, in terms of using tools, I'm using the similar tools as in the tribe work. It's erasing parts of images. So it's, now the Tableau Chinois is a mix of techniques that I used in probably 3 or 4 previous series. So it's a kind of a, come together of all these techniques.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe Liang, would you like to address to this issue and
Sure.
also the work of Tableau Chinois?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Thomas and Martin. And thank you, Thomas, for help us go through your 44 artistic career. in such a short time, and really helpful for me to understand your thinking and thoughts. And thank you, Martin, for giving us a virtual walkthrough of the exhibition. It's a lot of work and a lot of ideas behind the work. And I was just thinking when Thomas and Martin was talking, especially when Thomas was at the end of your talk, you show us a list of photography technique, and then it was so expensive. I was at one point I was really concerned about the interpreter, because your subject matter was ranging from astronomy to the history of photography and then technology. So I really think the interpreter should get double or triple pay, but a tribute to the interpreter as well, because the subject matter-wise was so diverse. It's amazing work. I cannot really hear the Chinese interpretation, but it must be tough. And just some thoughts about your recent work, the tableau chinois. And when I first looked at it, it was really interesting. I mean, it seems like the point of departure is this chance encounter between you and these magazines or like some photograph of the Chinese propaganda images. And then I think there's some similarity between this work and your previous work. I see this, it's detachments. When you were referring the early anecdotes of your career, like when you first make the portrait, when it's too small, and then people would like identify the content and then the person in the photograph, they will overlook the media itself. And then there's some similarity between this older work and this new one. And I think in a way your image, I mean the new work, the tableau chinois, especially the portrait of Mao, certainly aroused strong sentiments of certain viewers. But I think the meaning, the interpretation, the space of interpretation, if they just stop there, it would be it would be a pity, because when I was looking at it, I think it's really raised the question to me. I think it's also what you've been doing, perhaps. It's the idea of authorship. Because when we look at the propaganda image, I mean, who is really the author? Is the photographer who has the autonomy or the control of, or is the state or the party that we really want you to believe? And I think it touches upon this the question of authorship. And then, of course, your appropriation and the methodology that you employ in the past, that you work with the archive image, also at play. Martin just said beautifully, the archaeologist, you're almost like the archaeologist of photography. You dig into the different multiple layers of image, and to help people to realize it's actually the reason why you see the image. There's so hidden layers behind it. You bring the base layer to the front. So it's actually, in a way, it's three-dimensional. It's flat, but it's three-dimensional as well. So it's landscape. It's three-dimensional, but it's naked eyes in a way. So you see the different layer on the sand surface. So that's something very interesting about the work. So, but I think, and also when you describe this series of work, I think I use a very interesting term called schizophrenic. I think that's a very good critique on the state of contemporary China, because I mean, especially I can relate to it very strongly as a Taiwanese, and I mean, because to me, this body of work is really also show us the critique and perhaps the re-examination on the idealized image of China. I mean, it gives you this work give you the historical distance, so you could look at it more objectively. If you were showing the current leaders of CCP, there will be a different story. I mean, the discussion will be like all about this iconoclasms and then that kind of things. But this historical distance, I think, really help us to think the complexity of image making and how we perceive of the political propaganda. I think it's one of the beauty of the work. And so, but my question was really just a very tiny little one. I noticed when I look at the work, I don't know if that's true, but I noticed that although you show pixels, artifacts in the work, but for they're not. But when it comes to the portraits of Mao, there's no pixels on his face. Was it deliberate? Because it seemed like the deployment of the artifacts were pretty controlled and pretty conscious. But the face-wise, I see pixel on his collars and other parts, and even hands. But face, very interestingly, it was mostly untouched. I saw some portrait of the soldiers. They're in the background. Their face was blurred, but I wonder what this artistic decision behind it. And then yeah, I've been talking too long, but I'll stop here. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe first of all, I should say that copyright and authorship in China doesn't exist. So probably the photographer, Mrs. Bo, she made this portrait of Mao Zedong, but then the propaganda ministry took over and edited this portrait to a point that they could, yeah, put it on the entrance of the Forbidden City on the Tiananmen Square, where it was installed for years. So it's definitely the state who does all these kind of work on it. And concerning the pixelization of faces is, at a certain point I realized that pixelated portraits are pretty ugly. So if I would make a portrait of you and I would then start retouching it, I would probably do the same thing that I did with Mao Zedong's portrait. So I would leave the center, your character, more or less away from the pixel. So the pixel would start here. But this is something that just occurred while you're working. You're working on these images, and then you work on it, and then no, not yet. So it's really learning by doing, and human faces pixelized is just a no-go. So if there are soldiers in the background, it's okay. But if they are in the center of attraction, it's you have to be very careful with the pixels.
Thank you.
Okay, because our first discussion is about the Thomas' new work, Tableau Chinois, and then I will move to our second question to the camelus photography by Thomas. And because Thomas mentioned when you when you were starting working on astronomy and the stars, you mentioned that you will give up, you almost like give up the authorship and to use the archive. But when you look at the photogram or Zyko, and it's totally, I think it's almost that all the creation about the image was not only generated completely by the computer, but by control of the artist. So I would like to hear more about the authorship for the works such as like in photogram or in Zyco. So would you share more idea about this?
Sure. So yes, I can definitely say that I'm the creator and the author of the photograms and the cycles, because even though I work in a virtual darkroom or with the 3D software, I'm designing everything. It's not a work that is done by somebody else, but by myself. And I decide the composition and the objects. I am deciding everything, so I'm definitely the author of these images. You could also say I'm the author of the stars, because I got the negatives from the European Southern Observatory, but maybe the artistic work was then dropping and cutting these negatives to a point that they really look perfect. So there are always several layers of how do you say, work of editing. So the less work I did with the newspaper photographs, that was just cutting out the image. With the stars, I did the cropping. I decided the cropping. Let's take the Cassini work, it's adding the color. So it's not cropping and cutting, it's just adding the color. And with the Mars images, it's similar. It's not only, within the Mars, I did cropping plus the color. So my editing varies from series to series. And let's take the tribe series. The original source is a negative. So I had to invert it, bring it back to a positive. But if I do that, inverting a photograph also means you change color in a 180 degrees angle. So everything that is brown is going to be blue and vice versa. And because I wanted to show the negative, the color of the negative, but also the color of the inverted negative, I made a combination of these blue, brownish tones by erasing parts of one layer of it. So that's another kind of editing on the images, which is similar to the tableau chinoise, where I have the scan as the original source, then I make a digital file out of it, which will go back on that image. I create another digital file with a kind of different pixel structure and bring it back to the source. And then editing is erasing in pixels in the pixel structure. So, but of course, I would say, even with the newspaper photographs, I'm the author of all my work.
So, Mengjian, would you like to have some question for Thomas about maybe, because for our exhibition, it's very important that we choose to exhibit most of the work is cameras photography, and something like working with various archive ever since the 1980s until now. So would you like to have some question around this cameras photographer for Thomas or for Martin?
Okay, sure. I probably, my question will probably not be too specific about the camera-less technique, but since maybe if you allow me to like go sideways a little, but because Thomas mentioned his work on tripe, the tripe images from the 19th century, and it's also a relatively recent work, and which really caught my attention when I was at when I visited the show. And I can see from the title that you gave the series that is obviously you see it as a collaboration between the original author and yourself. And then what I find particularly intriguing is that also it has this element of you using a specific technique, for example, blowing up the photos and trying to reveal the hidden truths in the image, in the images, but comparing to comparing to the JPEG series that you have done before, there, when you blow up the pictures to kind of expose the pixel structure, the elements, it's also more like what I was previously saying. It's more of like a disruptive structure, it's to expose the hidden truth. But then in Tribe's photos, I see there is more tenderness in your process. There is tenderness, yeah. You do the same thing. You enlarge them over 3 times, and then you try to bring out the details and the techniques from the 19th century. But then there seems to be a warmthness in your revelation of all the things hidden in his images, including his own intentions as a photographer. And so I'm wondering, how do you place this collaboration or this particular series in your context, in the context of your career? Because you use the same technique, you have the same idea of revealing something hidden, but then there's but you're working with something that is 160 years old, and then the result is something that I feel is more subtle and gentle. And so I'm just curious. And then when you went to the V&A Museum, you specifically asked for this group of photos. So I'm just wondering what place does it has in your career and in your heart, maybe? Yeah.
How can I answer? So yes, you're probably right. I treated the tribe negatives pretty with my heart. Maybe it has something to do with the situation in the career. So I'm practicing photography since more or less since 40 years, and sometimes I'm very strict. Let's say, yeah, you mentioned the JPEGs. So the pixel is the pixel is the pixel is the pixel. I cannot control the compression rate, or I cannot control the structure a little bit, but not that much. So probably that's why, yeah, the JPEG photographs, they are pretty tough to look at. And no, what I really like is 19th century photography, because at that time, every photographer was a unique person. So he had to be a chemistry, he had to be a physician, he had to create his own emulsion, he had to make the paper or the glass plate sensitive. So it was really, everybody was unique. And that changed with the invention of the Leica, the 35mm camera. Now everybody's walking with the Leica, and now in the meantime, even the Leica is gone, and most of the people take photographs with their smartphones, and actually they don't care anything about how this works. And so I really think that 19th century, in terms of photography, technology, and also shooting the world, they were really starting traveling around the world to bring back all these photographs. I think it was a very rich time, and maybe this had consequences on my editing.
Do you mean that you wanted to keep the history and the time that is kind of embedded in the prints or the negatives as much as you can, and then still add something to it of your own?
Maybe, or maybe it's just what's on the photograph. So actually the concept of the tribe series is pretty strict. It says invert the negative, invert the color, and then bring these two layers together to one image. And so in a way, the concept is very strict and no mercy, but the result seems to be warmer than, as you mentioned, than in other series.
So, okay, Liang, would you like to have some questions? Because because I personally will be very interested to knowing about the JPEG. How is the very beginning of the JPEG? Is that true? That's your story about that when you are in New York for the September 11 attack, and you are there and you Photoshop that dramatic moment, and then when you coming back to German and you find you lost all those original camera photos, and then you got to search the internet for that image. And I think it's very dramatic story to start with a conversation about what is the photography and what is the limitation of the camera photo, and then what is left behind if you taking a photo and then it become nothing. So I really interested about, because the traditional definition of the photographer will be documenting what is behind, what is in front of you. Like you say, that a photographer deal with the reality in front of you. But I think this dramatic story about how you start with the JPEG is really interesting me. And would you like to talk more about the JPEG?
Okay. So yes, you're right. I was in New York on September 11th in 2001. And actually I saw the second tower. I was in the street and I saw the second tower collapsing. And I had a small analog camera with me, and I did some, yes, stupid as I am, I tried to capture it. And yeah, when I came back to Düsseldorf and I developed the film, there was nothing on the film, and I still don't know whether it was the battery or maybe they put up the X-ray at the airport to really get deep into all the luggage of the. So actually, I don't know. And yes, so I had no image of this pretty important event. So then I started searching like crazy for images of this attack. And at that time, I was already playing around with the JPEG structure. So I had seen some of the structure in some of the nudes, and at that time I didn't know where it comes from until I realized it has something to do with the compression rate. So yeah, you know that the JPEG is a shortcut for Joint Photographic Expert Group, and that is a jury who defines the compression rate for digital files. And that was done, I think, around 2000, or maybe earlier. That was necessary because when I started with the internet, I had to use a modem. I had to use a modem via telephone. And so the transmission was very slow. And large photographic files would take 10 minutes, 1 hour to build up on your computer screen. So there was a need to make these images smaller. And with the help of the JPEG, of the compression rate, you could decide in which rate you compress it, but you also had to decide in which quality you want to have it. If you compress them with a rate of 12, it doesn't change at all, and the file stays as big as it is. If you compress at 0, you make out of a 10 megabyte file, you make 100K, and the 100K will travel very fast through the internet, but with the consequences of this kind of incredibly bad structure of all the artifacts that then show up. And so then the idea was to combine these two things. So the JPEG is very much about speed and distribution of the internet. And the worst or the smallest images are the fastest and the most circulated and watched images. And if you probably look at a JPEG this size on the screen, you still believe that it's a real photograph. But if you then look at it in the museum where it's blown up to 250 meters, you realize it's a complete artificial photograph with a lot of artifacts. So it's about the distribution and speed of the internet, but also about our reception, how we look at photographs.
So, Liang, would you like to pose some questions to Thomas or to Martin?
Just two quick questions. When I went to look in, just follow up what Suping was asking previously. When I look at the series, the body of work of cycles and substracts, I was wondering what was where is the objectivity in this abstract images? Because your work seemed to work in the bands of like new objectivity in the idea of objectivity. So I was, and you're told by the bakers. So that influence in there. So just where do you think the objectivity lies in the seemingly abstract painting? And then maybe I see a rupture, a breakaway from the tradition. And another one is about when you're talking about the emergence of the Photoshop, and then you're an artist that seem to be open to new technology, and you work with your colleagues and then to explore the possibility of all kinds of photography, image making techniques. And then so I was wondering, I was wondering, how do you see the advancement of AI technology that especially in image making, like what people were calling the computational photography. For instance, there's one new feature in Photoshop. It's called super resolution, where you could blow up like any very small images you shoot in the past, blow up like to a huge scale. Like you can print a 35mm film, and you can scan it and use this feature and blow up like your portrait series and showing no grains. And then, so I was wondering, will you explore that maybe to your own archive? Are you aware of this new feature in Photoshop? And what do you think about your perception of this advancement of technology in image making?
Yeah, maybe I have to say that I'm working no more objective now. I gave it up. But of course, I'm trying to work conceptually as clear and with the biggest truth as possible, which you could compare maybe to objectivity. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, then Photoshop. Actually, the last thing you mentioned, I didn't know. Where can I find that?
It's easy. It's called super resolution. You Google it and you'll realize that.
I'll write it down. And
yeah, I mean, it will be very helpful.
Super resolution. Okay, I will look at it. But yeah, it's software. So in the analog world, you had to have a camera that was mechanically very good, and you had to have a lens that is produced pretty good. And with this combination, you could make sharp and very brilliant photographs. Now, you don't use this technique anymore. You use your smartphone, and with a lens which has that size. So this lens does not deliver any good image. It's only the software in the smartphone that makes these incredible high resolution images. So it's like magic. You have a bad lens, but you have brilliant photographs on your smartphone. Can't believe it. And concerning Photoshop, I would say Photoshop is just the new darkroom. Yeah. I know a lot of photographers who just edit their photograph. They just make some corrections, but leave their straightforward photograph more or less as it is. They correct some contrast and some missing colors, but I would say it's the dark room. But okay, now it's the light room. It's the light room on your computer screen, which is yeah. It's the pendant to the dark room in earlier times.
Thank you.
Okay, and then since that Liang has mentioned about how is the future of a photographer, I would like to ask Martin for the last question because our time has a limit. Martin, how would you see the development of contemporary photographer in the 21st centuries? And what is the most central issues for the photographer in your opinion?
Well, I think what Thomas is doing is, of course, some kind of a pioneer work in terms of creating space for photography as a discipline, because we are actually still in the beginning of something. Because there was painting, there was sculpture, and in the 60s, suddenly 70s, 80s, photography also became some kind of fine art. But I think in the 21st century, photography has most of all art forms the capacity to be a critical practice because of its inherent relation to technology, which is because of its relation to the machine, and the machine actually stands for modernism as such. And I think from that perspective, photography is that kind of discipline which offers most openness for artists to experiment on and to take a critical stance. And I mean, I entitled my essay "Photography for the 21st Century" because I think Thomas is an artist who's kind of, artists always collaborate. So one is doing this, then the other is doing that, then the other is doing that. But Thomas is someone who opens a space for other artists to also already now of younger generations to draw upon and to work on. And yeah, that's what I think of photography in the 21st century, that it, due to its relation to the machine and to mass production and all these patterns, that it's the most maybe the most promising art form and still to be developed.
Martin, you forgot one thing.
Of course.
The future of photography is depending on the people who practice it. If they are brilliant, photography will be great. If they are stupid, like the Chinese government, it will be dumb.
That's true, but probably maybe you realized that the exhibition we made here was really also pretty much drawn to the subjective capacity of an artist. So I consider that as an artist's related show, because there's not only category like Düsseldorf School or like, you know, we wanted to go beyond that. And I think it's important that people are doing art, people with their intentions, with their opinions and with their life, basically. Yes, I agree.
And my last question is from the audience in our Facebook or YouTube that say he want to ask Thomas. So when you have a new work or a new idea about corresponding to the COVID-19 pandemic situation now?
Actually, no. I have no idea what you could do with this pandemic.
Okay, and then
but maybe just something briefly. The photographer always has to work with things coming from somewhere. So I think photography is also a practice which operates from images. And Thomas is sitting on his desk since approximately 30 years and making art. So it's a pre-pandemic art practice in a way.
Yeah. Okay. I believe that many of our audience watching in front of a screen are eager to hear more from the artists or curators. But now is the time to close our today's forum. I would like to thank all the speakers and the panelists join us today. Thomas Ruth After Image Work 1989 to 2020 will be on view till the 4th of July at National Taiwan Museum of Fine Art. Although now we are temporarily closed to 28th of June due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We will now producing more online exhibition video for our audience. And also this forum will be posted on our museum website and YouTube and social media. I hope all of you can enjoy the show through the different channels. And I hope there will be a future opportunity to invite Thomas and Martin to Taiwan for the exhibition collaboration and art events. And thank you for all of joining us today. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.